I'm a 24-year-old female who just graduated from nursing school last Saturday. To celebrate this major milestone, especially since I'm the first in my family to earn a degree, my parents hosted a big party at their home. They invited our extended family, my college friends, and neighbors who've supported me over the years. My older sister, Cynthia, 27, who is 6 months pregnant, attended with her husband, Rick. I genuinely thought everything would go smoothly. Cynthia had seemed excited for me and had even offered to help our mom with the decorations. However, Cynthia has a long history of needing to be the center of attention. She's known for hijacking important moments like announcing her engagement at our cousin's wedding and revealing her pregnancy at our grandmother's 80th birthday party. She often posts overly dramatic updates on social media just to gain sympathy. The party itself was going great. Everyone was congratulating me, asking about my future plans, and enjoying the amazing food and cake my parents had prepared. I was chatting with some friends out by the patio when Cynthia suddenly got up from her seat, looking unusually determined, and began walking toward us, that I recognized from previous dramatic episodes. She stopped right in front of me, and Rick pointed her finger directly at me and announced loud enough for everyone at the party to hear that I had been flirting with her husband all evening and trying to seduce him while she was pregnant and vulnerable. The entire party went completely silent and all conversation stopped mid-sentence. Cynthia continued yelling that I was a horrible sister who couldn't stand to see her happy and that I was jealous of her marriage and trying to ruin her family because I was bitter about being single. Alone, I tried to tell her that she was being ridiculous and that I had barely spoken to Rick except to say hello when they arrived, but she kept interrupting me and getting louder while pointing dramatically and saying that she saw me touching his arm and laughing at his jokes in a way that was clearly inappropriate. Rick just stood there looking shocked and uncomfortable while everyone at the party stared at this scene unfolding, and I could see my parents rushing over from across the yard with worried expressions because they could hear Cynthia's voice carrying over all the background noise. I told Cynthia that she was making a scene over nothing and that she needed to sit down and stop embarrassing herself and everyone else, but she kept going and started crying while talking about how betrayed she felt and how she couldn't trust anyone in her own family. Then Rick, who had been completely silent this entire time and just looking down at the ground while Cynthia was making her accusations, suddenly looked up and said that Cynthia was the one who had been cheating and that the baby she was carrying probably wasn't even his. The entire party gasped and Cynthia's face went completely white as Rick continued talking and said that he had found text messages on her phone 3 weeks ago from someone named Randall, who she had been seeing behind his back for months, and that the timing of the pregnancy lined up with when she was having the affair. Cynthia immediately started screaming that Rick was lying and trying to deflect attention from his own behavior, but Rick pulled out his phone and started reading some of the text messages out loud while Cynthia tried to grab the device from his hands. The messages were clearly romantic and sexual in nature and mentioned meeting up at hotels when Rick was working late shifts at his job, and one of them specifically talked about Cynthia being worried about the pregnancy and whether she should tell Rick the truth about paternity. Cynthia was sobbing and screaming that the messages were taken out of context and that Rick was trying to humiliate her in front of our family, but Rick kept reading more messages that made it clear she had been lying to him for months about where she was going and who she was spending time with. All the anger and frustration I had been holding back about Cynthia's attention-seeking behavior over the years just erupted, and I completely lost my temper because she had ruined what was supposed to be my special day with her false accusations and drama. I stepped forward and shoved Cynthia hard enough that she stumbled backward, and when she tried to steady herself against a table, I grabbed her shoulders and started shaking her while yelling that she was a selfish liar who couldn't stand anyone else having a moment of happiness. Cynthia started hitting me back, and we ended up in a full physical fight right there in front of everyone at the party, with her pulling my hair and me slapping her face while our relatives and friends stood around in shock. My dad and 2 of my uncles had to physically separate us while my mom was crying and asking what was wrong with both of us, and Cynthia was holding her pregnant belly and saying that I was trying to hurt her baby while I was screaming that she had destroyed my graduation party with her lies and attention-seeking behavior. I never tried to hit her belly or anything of sorts. I was just angry and avoided the belly. Rick just stood there watching the whole fight without trying to help either of us, and after my dad pulled me away from Cynthia, Rick announced to everyone that he was leaving and that Cynthia could find her own way home because he was done with her lies and manipulation. He walked out of the party while Cynthia was still crying and begging him not to leave her, and then she turned to our parents and started demanding that they choose between supporting her or supporting me in this situation. The party basically ended after that because everyone felt uncomfortable and didn't know what to say or do, and most of the guests left within the next 30 minutes while making polite excuses about having other obligations. My parents were devastated that my graduation celebration had turned into such a disaster, and they spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out what had happened and how things had escalated so quickly between Cynthia and me. Cynthia ended up calling her friend to come pick her up because Rick had taken their car when he left, and she spent the entire time waiting for the ride crying and saying that everyone was ganging up on her and that I had always been jealous of her life. I helped my parents clean up the decorations and leftover food from what should have been a happy celebration night for. Reacting the way I did edit, I'm getting a lot of questions about the details of what happened and why the situation escalated so quickly, so I wanted to provide some additional context about my relationship with Cynthia and the history of her attention-seeking behavior that led up to this incident. My graduation party, Cynthia and I have never had a particularly close relationship because she's always been the type of person who needs to be the center of attention in every situation, and this has caused problems at family events for as long as I can remember. When we were younger, she would do things like fake being sick on my birthday so that our parents would focus on taking care of her instead of celebrating with me, or she would start crying and claiming that other kids at school were bullying her whenever I brought friends over to the house so that everyone would comfort her instead of paying attention to my friendships. As we got older, Cynthia's attention-seeking behavior became more sophisticated and manipulative, and she learned how to create drama at important moments in other people's lives to redirect focus back onto herself. She announced her engagement at our cousin Megan's wedding reception by standing up during the speeches and showing off her ring while saying that Rick had proposed to her that morning, which completely overshadowed Megan's special day and caused a lot of tension in our extended family. When our grandmother turned 80 last year and our whole family gathered for a big celebration dinner at a nice restaurant, Cynthia waited until everyone was seated and the meal had been served before announcing that she was pregnant with her first child. She made this announcement by standing up and clinking her glass to get everyone's attention, and then she spent the rest of the evening talking about her pregnancy symptoms and due date. While our grandmother's birthday became secondary to Cynthia's news, Rick has always been a quiet person who doesn't like confrontation or drama, and he works as a mechanic at a local garage and keeps to himself and doesn't get involved in family disputes, which is why everyone at the party was so shocked when he finally spoke up and revealed the truth about Cynthia's affair. The reason I was so angry about Cynthia's false accusations at my graduation party wasn't just because they were lies, but because this was supposed to be my moment to celebrate a major achievement that I had worked really hard for over the past 2 years. Nursing school was incredibly difficult and demanding, and I had to balance studying with working part-time to pay for my expenses while living at home with my parents to save money on rent. I had struggled academically in high school and never thought I would be able to handle college-level coursework, but I was determined to pursue nursing because I wanted to have a stable career that would allow me to help people and support myself financially. When I finally graduated and passed my licensing exam, it felt like I had accomplished something really significant that proved I was capable of more than anyone had expected from me. My parents were incredibly proud of my achievement because nobody in our immediate family had ever graduated from college before, and they wanted to throw a big celebration to show how much my success meant to them, and to thank all the people who had supported me throughout nursing school. They spent weeks planning the party and invited everyone who had been part of my journey. Cynthia knew how important this party was to me and to our parents, and she also knew that her accusations about me flirting with Rick were completely false because I had been focused on talking to my college friends and catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in months. 4 days later, I had a long conversation with my parents yesterday about Cynthia's behavior at my graduation party and the years of attention-seeking incidents that led up to this situation, and I told them that they bear some responsibility for what happened because they've always forced me to pretend that we're a happy family instead of addressing Cynthia's problematic behavior directly. My mom and dad have always had this philosophy that family conflicts should be kept private and that we should present a united front to the outside world regardless of what's happening behind closed doors, which meant that whenever Cynthia did something inappropriate or hurtful, they would tell me to just ignore it and not make a big deal about it because family harmony was more important than individual feelings. When Cynthia announced her engagement at cousin Megan's wedding reception 3 years ago, my parents told me that I was being petty for being upset about it and that I should be happy for my sister. Instead of focusing on the timing of her announcement, they said that Megan wouldn't remember or care about this detail years from now, and that I was making the situation worse by bringing it up and creating tension between Cynthia and the rest of our extended family. After Cynthia announced her pregnancy at our grandmother's 80th birthday dinner last year, I tried to talk to my parents about how this pattern of behavior was hurtful and disrespectful to other people, but they dismissed my concerns and said that Cynthia was just excited about her life milestones and wanted to share her happiness with the family. They told me that I was being jealous and unsupportive of it, and that I needed to work on being more generous and understanding toward my sister. I told my parents that their refusal to address Cynthia's attention-seeking behavior over the years had enabled her to escalate to the point where she felt comfortable making false accusations at my graduation party, and that their approach of always prioritizing family peace over individual feelings had taught Cynthia that she could get away with inappropriate behavior as long as she framed it as sharing her happiness or being Emotional, my dad initially tried to defend their parenting approach by saying that they had always treated Cynthia and me equally, and that they couldn't control how their adult children chose to behave at family events, but I pointed out that equal treatment doesn't mean ignoring problematic behavior, and that their failure to set boundaries had directly contributed to the situation at my graduation party. I explained to them that Cynthia's false accusations weren't just hurtful to me personally, but that they had also embarrassed our entire family in front of friends, neighbors, and extended relatives who came to celebrate my achievement and instead witnessed a dramatic scene involving affairs, paternity questions, and a physical fight between sisters. I told them that some of these people might never feel comfortable attending future family events because of what they witnessed, and that Cynthia's behavior had damaged our family's reputation in the community. My mom started crying during this conversation and said that she never realized how much Cynthia's behavior had been affecting me over the years, and that she thought I was just being competitive with my sister rather than genuinely hurt by her actions. She admitted that they had probably been too focused on avoiding conflict and maintaining the appearance of family unity, and that they hadn't considered how their approach might be enabling Cynthia to continue behaving inappropriately. I told my parents that their apologies were appreciated, but that I needed to see actual changes in how they handled Cynthia's behavior going forward, and that I wouldn't be attending any family events where Cynthia was present unless she publicly apologized to everyone who witnessed her false accusations and the resulting drama. At my graduation party, my dad asked me what I meant by a public apology, and I explained that Cynthia needed to contact all the guests who were at the graduation party and acknowledge that her accusations against me were false, that she had created unnecessary drama at what was supposed to be a celebration of my achievement, and that she was sorry for putting everyone in an uncomfortable position with her personal issues. My parents discussed this privately for about an hour while I waited in the living room, and when they came back they told me that they had decided to ban Cynthia from all future family events until she completed the public apology I had requested. They said that they would call Cynthia that evening and explain their decision, and that they would also reach out to the extended family members who were at the party to let them know that they didn't approve of Cynthia's behavior and that steps were being taken to address the situation. My mom also said that she wanted to personally apologize to some of my college friends who had attended the party because she was embarrassed that their first impression of our family had been so negative, and she asked me if I could provide her with their contact information so she could send them a message explaining that Cynthia's behavior didn't represent our family's values. My parents called Cynthia that evening while I was at work, and according to my mom, the conversation didn't go well because Cynthia immediately started crying and saying that everyone was turning against her during the most vulnerable time in her life. Cynthia argued that she was 8 months pregnant and dealing with marriage problems, and that the family should be supporting her rather than punishing her for having an emotional reaction at the party. Cynthia also claimed that Rick had been acting suspicious and distant for weeks before the party, and that she genuinely believed I was flirting with him because she was feeling insecure and paranoid about her relationship. She said that her accusations weren't meant to be malicious but were just the result of pregnancy hormones and stress about her marriage, and that she shouldn't be held responsible for Rick's decision to reveal private information about their relationship in front of everyone. My parents told Cynthia that they understood she was going through a difficult time, but that her behavior at the graduation party was unacceptable regardless of her emotional state, and that she needed to take responsibility for the false accusations and the scene she had created. They explained that the family ban would remain in place until she completed the public apology, and that they hoped she would use this time to reflect on her actions and work on repairing the relationship she had damaged. Cynthia hung up on them before the conversation was finished, and she hasn't responded to any of their calls or text messages since then, which is pretty typical behavior for her when she doesn't get the reaction she wants from family members. Update: a few days later, Rick followed through on what he said at my graduation party and demanded that Cynthia take a non-invasive prenatal paternity to determine whether the baby she's carrying is actually his, and the results came back yesterday, confirming that he is not the biological father of the child. Cynthia called our parents this morning in tears and said that Rick had kicked her out of their house and told her that he was filing for divorce because he couldn't trust her anymore and refused to raise another man's child. According to Cynthia, Rick had been cold and distant toward her ever since the graduation party incident, and he had been staying in their spare bedroom rather than sleeping in their bed together while they waited for the paternity test results. When the results confirmed that the baby wasn't his, Rick apparently told Cynthia that he felt completely betrayed and manipulated, and that he couldn't continue their marriage knowing that she had been lying to him about the affair and the pregnancy for months. Cynthia is now 38 weeks pregnant and could give birth at any time, and she has nowhere to go because she doesn't have enough money saved to get her own apartment, and most of her friends have distanced themselves from her since word about the affair and false accusations spread through our social circle. She called our parents crying and begging them to let her move back into their house temporarily until she can figure out a more permanent living situation after the baby is born. My parents were conflicted about what to do because they had just banned Cynthia from family events until she apologized for her behavior at the graduation party, but they also didn't want to leave their pregnant daughter homeless during the final weeks of her pregnancy. They asked me how I would feel about Cynthia living in their house again and whether I thought it would interfere with our relationship and my willingness to visit them. I told my parents that despite our current feud and my anger about the graduation party incident, I didn't think an innocent baby should suffer because of Cynthia's poor decisions and behavior, and that they should let her move back home temporarily to ensure that she has a safe place to give birth and recover. I explained that my issue was with Cynthia's attention-seeking behavior and false accusations, not with her unborn child, and that I could separate my feelings about her from my concern for the baby's welfare. I did tell my parents that I expected them to maintain some boundaries with Cynthia even if they let her move back home, and that she still needed to complete the public apology for her behavior at the graduation party before I would be willing to have any direct contact with her. I also said that if Cynthia tried to use her pregnancy and homelessness to manipulate them into dropping the consequences for her actions, then I would reconsider my advice about letting her stay in their house. My parents agreed to let Cynthia move back home with the understanding that this was a temporary arrangement focused on ensuring the baby's safety and health, and that it didn't mean they were excusing or forgetting about her behavior at the graduation party. They called Cynthia back and told her that she could stay in her old bedroom until 6 weeks after the baby was born, which would give her time to recover from childbirth and start looking for a more permanent living situation. Cynthia moved back into our parents' house yesterday with just 4 suitcases of clothes and some basic personal items because Rick had told her to leave immediately and hadn't given her time to pack properly. According to my mom, Cynthia has been crying almost constantly since she arrived and keeps saying that her life has fallen apart and that everyone has turned against her when she needs support the most. Rick apparently told Cynthia that he would continue paying for her prenatal medical expenses and the cost of delivery since they're still legally married, but that he wouldn't provide any financial support for the baby after it's born because he's not the biological father. He also said that he wanted Cynthia to remove all of her belongings from their house within the next 2 weeks, and that he would be changing the locks and filing the divorce papers as soon as possible. Cynthia has been trying to contact the biological father of her baby, who is apparently the Randall person mentioned in the text messages that Rick read at my graduation party, but according to my mom, Randall has been ignoring her calls and messages since he found out about the pregnancy. Cynthia told our parents that Randall is married with 2 children of his own and that he had made it clear during their affair that he wasn't planning to leave his wife or take responsibility for any consequences of their relationship. My parents are feeling overwhelmed by having Cynthia back in the house because she requires a lot of emotional support and attention while she deals with the divorce, the approaching birth, and her uncertain future as a single mother. My mom said that Cynthia has been monopolizing their time with constant conversations about her problems and fears, and that she's been asking them to make decisions for her about things like finding a lawyer, choosing pediatrician, and applying for government assistance programs. I've been staying away from my parents' house while Cynthia is living there because I'm not ready to interact with her yet, and I don't want to create additional stress for my parents who are already dealing with a difficult situation. I've been calling my mom every few days to check on how things are going and to offer practical advice about resources that might help Cynthia transition to independent living after the baby is born. Final update: 1 year later. It's been a full year since the graduation party incident that destroyed my relationship with Cynthia and exposed her affair and pregnancy lies, and I wanted to provide a final update on how everything has played out for our family and what the current situation looks like now that the dust is settled. Cynthia gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Grace 3 weeks after she moved back in with her parents, and the delivery went smoothly despite all the stress and drama surrounding the circumstances of the pregnancy. Rick came to the hospital when Cynthia went into labor because they were still legally married, and he wanted to make sure she had support during the birth. But he made it clear that this was the extent of his involvement, and that he wouldn't be taking any parental role with the baby. The divorce between Cynthia and Rick was finalized about 8 months ago, after a lengthy process that involved dividing their shared assets and determining spousal support payments, and Rick ended up keeping the house while Cynthia received a small settlement that she used to pay legal fees and start a college fund for Grace. Rick has been decent about the whole situation and didn't try to make the divorce more difficult than necessary, even though he had every right to be bitter about Cynthia's lies and betrayal. Cynthia never completed the public apology that my parents had required before she could attend family events again, and she has essentially been living as a permanent resident in our parents' house rather than finding her own place and establishing independence as a single mother. My parents applied for and received legal custody of Grace when it became clear that Cynthia was struggling with depression and wasn't fully capable of caring for a newborn on her own, and they've essentially become Grace's primary caregivers while Cynthia works part-time at a retail job. The biological father, Randall, has refused to acknowledge paternity or provide any financial support for Grace, and Cynthia has been working with a family court attorney for the past 6 months to try to force him to take a paternity test and pay child support. Randall hired his own lawyer and has been fighting the paternity claim because he doesn't want his wife to find out about the affair, and he's worried about how child support payments would affect his existing family's finances. Even if Cynthia wins the case and receives child support payments, the amount probably won't be enough for her to afford her own apartment and childcare while working full-time. My relationship with Cynthia has remained strained and distant throughout this entire year because she never apologized for her false accusations at my graduation party or acknowledged that her behavior was inappropriate and hurtful. We've only spoken directly a few times when I've been visiting my parents, and she's been in the same room, and these interactions have been polite but cold, with no real effort to address the underlying issues between us. Cynthia seems to have convinced herself that everyone overreacted to what happened at the graduation party and that she was the real victim in the situation because she lost her marriage and ended up as a single mother with limited resources. My parents have been struggling with the financial and emotional burden of supporting Cynthia and Grace, and they've aged significantly over the past year from the stress of essentially starting over as parents in their late 50s. They love Grace and are committed to providing her with a stable home environment, but they've admitted to me privately that they're worried about their ability to handle the demands of raising a child while also managing their own health issues and retirement planning. I've tried to help my parents by babysitting Grace occasionally and contributing money for baby supplies and expenses, but I've maintained my boundary about not having a close relationship with Cynthia. Grace is an innocent child who deserves love and support from her extended family, but I refuse to pretend that Cynthia's actions were acceptable just because time has passed.